there were too many examples of programmers especially spending 5-6 sprints on something until it was able to be demonstrated, and suddenly we're like, that's not what we wanted at all, and you've just wasted 12
Yeah.
weeks on something. And it's just trying to get that mindset shift, because while we were using terminology like MVP, they were like, well, this is my minimal viable product, it's going to take me 12 weeks. But by changing that
Hmm.
to, you need to be able to just show somebody your progress, then it
Somebody.
shifted. And you tell the story and people are like, well, that's so obvious, that's what they should have suggested. That's not what they're here to do. They're here to program. They're not here to think about these process changes. That's what producers are for.
Welcome, everybody, to this episode of the Zero to Play podcast. I'll be your guest host today, whom Carl has dubbed the Senior Specialist, John Diaz. I'll be sitting down with Marc Burrage, a design director at Creative Assembly based out of the UK, whom you may know behind the Total War games. We're going to talk about the different skills and mindset needed to help steer a production towards success and grow a thriving team in the new world of remote and on-site development. We'll emphasize the importance of soft skills and empathy, and the myth that there's a magical one-size-fits-all winning strategy that we can apply in game development. Spoiler, there isn't. We'll also discuss why Creative Assembly continues to win Best Places to Work for in the UK. So, sit back, relax, and enjoy this episode of the Zero to Play podcast. All right, Marc, I got to ask, as a development director at Creative Assembly, is it a myth that you can only work on one project at a time?
Um, no, I don't think it's a myth. I think it's a complicated question, but I think if you're focused on, I think it's very difficult to split your attention. I'm the kind of producer who the project you're working on is super important to me. I get my everyday drive and passion from the title itself. And
Hmm.
if I had to split my attention between multiple projects, it's not to say that I couldn't do it, but the reason I got into games was to deliver a particular title. And most of the larger projects we work on here have upwards of at least 4 or 5 producers on them, which means that everybody has so much focus on even just one bit of the game, let alone being able to cover a whole project themselves. I think there are examples where in the games industry where you could focus on multiple titles, and I think those tend to be like centralized services. So here at CA, for example, the audio team is split across multiple titles, just because of the nature of when audio is needed. So they will focus on a title for a particular period of time, then move on to another, and there will obviously be overlap between those. There's a number of other teams that do the same, and I think that's a slightly different mindset, because then you're almost a service team that's delivering to
Hmm.
clients. It's not exactly the same as if you're an external contractor, but it has similar qualities to it in terms of what kind of producer you would need to be. I think your account management skills need to be stronger there, because you're not necessarily always going to be able to deliver the the product, the timing, the everything exactly when somebody wants it. So I think in the traditional sense, game producers should stick to one title. But
Really?
as I said, I think the question's a bit more nuanced than that.
Indeed, totally, totally. There's the two camps, right? The two extremes. There's the person that wants to have a light hand in everything,
Hmm.
and there's a person that wants to have a heavier hand in one thing and be able to kind of put the blinders on and
Yep.
get that out the door and commit all the attention to that.
Yep.
Tell me what's a good day like for a development director, or tell me what a good day is. Tell me what a not so good day is.
So I think a good day for me is heading towards that utopia where you don't need producers. I think it's the thing that producers don't like to acknowledge, which is if everything was going great, you wouldn't be needed. That you
Yeah.
can just see your teams running. So for me, when I was running Arena, when it was at its full scale, I would come in and the meetings would grow in size in terms of the level that was being reported at. So the first meetings that happened were right down at the team level. So you would see all of the stand-ups happening around the floor, everyone gathering into the little groups, and then it would gradually sort of go up and up the scale of then the leads would meet together, and then the leads would then meet with myself and the other game level directors, and a good day is a day where things are just going smoothly. Everyone is on track. Everybody's happy. There's no blockers. But it's interesting, right? If you're a good producer, I would argue those days were a little unnerving, and you may not get your full energy from those sort of days. So a bad day is a day where everything is on fire, and you're just running around everywhere trying to solve things. But for a lot of producers, myself included, those kind of days, as long as they don't happen too often, are kind of the days when you can get most energized, because little things like in a stand-up, when I was running some of the day-to-day teams, I would always try and convey to them that the typical things that you would cover off in a stand-up of, what did you do yesterday, what are you planning on doing today, they're not for my benefit, they're for everybody else, so that you can come together and understand what it is that you can do to help each other. And the only thing I'm really interested in is when you're telling me what your blockers are, the things that you can't do without somebody else going and solving it for you, because then I can just gather those together and it's like, right, that's my quest log for today, off we go, I'm going to go solve those things. And it then helps them understand that my role is not as their superior, their lead, their manager. It's as a facilitator working side by side with them. And I think the best studios have that arrangement, that dev management, production, whatever you call it, operates at this sort of sideways level. And that's not to say that they're not involved in a lot of the higher up leadership decisions, but it is more from an organizational, an objective position, rather than saying, I can tell you this person isn't pulling their weight, this person needs that. Because when you start doing that, you break trust that you've got within the team. And I think there are opportunities to give that information to those people's leads, as long as you do it in a way that is constructive, and that if they were to hear you telling that to their lead, they wouldn't feel bad, if that makes sense. That you're doing it of like, I want to help this person, and I think they can best be helped by this sort of thing. So yeah, it's an interesting mix of what a good day and a bad day is. I think my ideal day is somewhere in the middle, where there's enough things going right that overall you're okay, but you've still got some fires that you need to put out, because that utopian place of never needing project managers, I don't think it's ever going to happen. It's just, you want to get to the point where some of your teams are running like that, so you can focus your attention on the ones that aren't. And I think some project managers, producers, don't like to admit that. They like to always be busy. They always like to, they run their teams in a way that means that they're irreplaceable. And I think in any discipline, when that happens, it's a problem, because you don't want people like that on your team. And that might sound like quite an extreme statement, but no one should be irreplaceable. If for whatever reason they were not available one day, and you haven't got that succession planning, you haven't got that delegation of responsibilities, it's just wrong. And that's
totally,
not to say that you teams can't support high performing people, because every studio, every team needs that in order to kind of give them a bit of energy. But as soon as you identify people like that, you need to be thinking, well, how can we replicate this? How can we spread that knowledge down? How can we make sure that we're not entirely reliant on that person? And it's a delicate balance. I just, I fundamentally don't like people that make themselves busy, because when you make yourself busy, you make yourself unapproachable. And that to me is a really key quality of a producer. Is you should almost be like a parent in a non-weird way of that, right? You should be able to, people should be able to tell you anything about what's going on in their lives, in the game, in their relationships with people in the studio, because the more of that information you've got, the better decisions you can make. And it's a fine line, because you still need to have a certain level of professionalism, but I think you can get closer to the people side than most people realize.
Yeah, you called out some great things there. You called out being a facilitator. You called out succession planning, right? Trying to not hoard all the information and knowledge and trying to
Yeah.
disseminate that as wide as possible across the team. A boring day would be a great day, right? When you're not needed. Of course, it
You need
feels
them
great to be
sometimes.
needed.
Yeah.
Yeah, yeah. It's great to feel needed and be like have people constantly knocking at your door. Mark, we need you for this. Mark, we need, that's an exciting. There's like yes, I get to shine and help,
Yeah.
and finding that balance, right? Games, like you said, are always going to have so many moving pieces. We're a passion driven industry.
Yeah.
People are always going to want to push the needle. There's never going to be a thing where it's just kind of assembly line. Hey, we know how to do it. We've done it countless years. Let's just keep following the formula, right? We're not an automobile manufacturer, right? It's
Right.
very, very different from that.
Right.
You mentioned Total War Arena.
Mm-hmm.
It was one of your free to play titles.
Mm-hmm.
How large was the team there? And compare that to the largest teams you've
Mm-hmm.
had to manage.
So Arena has had two recent lifespans. One in 2018 to 19 when it was live worldwide with Wargaming, and then another from August 2020 to now where it's live in China via NetEase. So it was at its biggest back in 2018 when we ran it on Wargaming. We had about 60 people on the title. And Arena was an experiment not only in free-to-play games, because predominantly all of our Total War titles up before that point were your traditional box products. It was also an experiment in how we make the games. The Total War formula is very well refined now, and a lot of the production methodologies they can now use are more waterfall. They're a lot more predictable. It's a lot about content generation and focusing specifically on the new features for each title. With Arena being, it was being built to be a live game. We wanted to take a more agile approach to its development, both pre and post launch. It's one of the reasons I got the opportunity to come to Creative Assembly, because my previous experience in web and mobile tech was all around agile and predominantly some form of Scrum. Oh, the lights going off in there.
That's the universal signal, like time to go home.
And so what that meant was that because my experience was similar and a lot of the other producers in the studio didn't have that, it was a good fit. So I came in just before we went into open beta. And open beta for a free-to-play game is basically its lifespan, because you're never really settling at a point where the game is finished. You're always trying to react to the current trends, where you need to adapt to listen to your audience, basically. So we were going with a Scrum type methodology. I try and be careful not to specifically say a methodology, because my approach to production methodologies is that they're all a toolkit, and the more you can learn, the bigger your toolkit is, and the more options you'll have with working with each team. I'll come back to why that's super important. But if I talk about the teams, we had teams that were feature focused, so those were probably the most cross-discipline. So they had design, tech, art, QA embedded, and then we would borrow from places like audio. Then you had what we called content focused teams, so they were delivering more commanders, more factions, more units for the games. They were quite art heavy in their focus, but they would also have some programmers for implementation. Again, the QA. We had some platform based teams. So they would be predominantly back-end coders, because they were building the server component of the game, and that was quite unique for Arena, because again, our mainline Total War games, their multiplayer was generally peer-to-peer, whereas with Arena it was client and server based. So we kind of
Yeah.
developed that tech within our team, which has now gone on to be a key component of kind of the studio-wide approach, which is great. And then we also had live ops teams. So their focus was essentially to be firefighters, of taking any initial things that came in. There'd be a mixture of back and front end coders, QA, and QA who are very specifically skilled in hunting down problems, recreating them, so that the team could get hold of them. And what was interesting about those different team makeups is, even just the way I've described it, you can probably guess that the approach and the mindset each of those teams had was never going to be the same. I don't like to stereotype, but if you compare your typical artist with your typical back-end programmer, your assumption of how different those two types of people are likely to be is largely true. And I think there's nothing wrong with going into a situation like that with stereotypes, as long as you're willing to be proved wrong. In terms of the approach that you take with managing them, at least, not on an individual level. And it was interesting, just some of the techniques that we used that were radically different between teams. I had one feature team that they loved, if they were doing a bug fix sprint, we would have a TV on the wall that said how many bugs they'd currently fixed. And, every time it would update, there'd be like, a cheer and a high-fiving. And we tried that same approach with one of the content teams, and they found it extremely demoralizing to have their work objectified like that, because in their mind you can't quantify what they're doing in terms of bugs. It's a lot more subjective than that. So that's something we immediately took away. And we very quickly realized that the 2 weekly retrospectives that we would do at the end of each sprint were just as important to focus on the process that team had used to get there as it was the part of the product they worked on. So while we were having product feedback and how that was made from the team, we were equally having feedback and refinement about the process. So, I honestly can't remember 2 sprints that we ran identically for any of the teams, because once they realized that they could feedback on how they were working, and we were willing to change almost anything, because when you're only doing a 2-week experiment, you're limiting the impact that can have. So even if it sounds absolutely bonkers what they're suggesting, it's like, fine, this is your process. If you want to try it for 2 weeks, let's try it. And there were times where we get to the end of the 2 weeks and go, well, that was completely bonkers, wasn't it? So we're not doing that again. But it wasn't me just slamming them down. It was, okay, you've got a 2-week window to prove whether or not it works. And the majority of the time, their suggestions were sensible, especially once they realized that they were going to be listened to, and also that there was a bit of pressure on them to go, okay, not only are you going to be listened to, but you're going to have 2 weeks to show why this is better than the way we were doing it. And obviously there was, different degrees of buy-in, depending on the team. You'd get some teams that had devs that have been in the company for decades in some cases, who were very jaded and cynical about, this cool new agile, and why couldn't they just be left alone to make something for 6 months and it'll all be fine? Spoilers, that doesn't work. And you have to kind of utilize a range of different motivation techniques, shall we say, to get that buy-in. But I think, the key thing about the process is, I've been on all manner of different agile trainings, waterfall trainings, and fundamentally, the people running those courses are trying to sell you their methodology, right? That's their job. Especially when you get up to the level of doing like consultancy training, because they want to put you out there as an evangelist of their way of doing it, and they want you to sell the package of training to other people, so it becomes like a pyramid scheme essentially. There's nothing fundamentally wrong with that, as long as you go into it with your eyes open and say, fine, tell me everything that you think is wonderful about your methodology, and I'm going to pick out what I think is great. I think it becomes problematic when people come away from these things thinking that just because that person in the training course has said this is the way we have to do it, that's the way you have
Mm-hmm.
to do it. And you will hear in these training courses people going, if you deviate away from this, then you are, you're never going to get the best out of your team, because of course they are, because of course they're going to say that their way of doing it is the best way.
Yes. Yeah, they're not going to say the other thing.
Yeah,
Mm-hmm.
yeah. So if you treat it as, great, I've now got another range of techniques and tools and processes that we can try out, because it feels like I'm the masked magician telling people there is no magic way of running a team. Every team is different. They're human beings. If we were managing robots, sure, I'm sure there's an off-the-shelf thing you can get. But I think it also,
That's a good way to put it. I would say, like, come at it as flexible as possible. There is no one size fits all. People want there to be. You want to be able to prove out a pattern that you apply en masse to every project, and it just works. But that's not the case, and in fact, that's a strength that you managed to bring onto the team, right? If you've seen a few different variations,
yeah,
and you come at it with a very open mindset to say, "Hey, I'm going to borrow this particular idea, bring it back, and try it out with the team," right? You're not
that's it.
locking down the
That's it.
team for longer than a sprint. You're like, hey, see how this fits. Take
Exactly.
it out for a spin.
And I think
One
of the key bits, right, is that producers, project managers, dev managers, we can sometimes get a bad rep for being the suits, right? For being the ones who are just bringing in the buzzwords of, let's get this done, we can do it, without actually any tangible thing behind it. And I think by showing that you're kind of allowing them behind the curtain of going, I don't believe that this particular buzzword or this methodology particularly works for us here. I think this is what we should
absolutely.
try. And you're explaining it to them in language that they understand. And you're showing that you are humble enough to go, I want you to tell me whether or not you think this works. And if it doesn't, I'm going to go and work to find something that does. I think that's a great way of connecting with a team, because then they see that you're not just a talking textbook. You're somebody who is taking the time to learn what's important to them and their specific problems. And it does take longer and it is harder work, but that is what we are paid to do. So it's important.
Absolutely. Yeah. I think that's a part of the reason, or part of it, is Creative Assembly is a consistent winner of Best Place to Work in the UK.
Yeah, I think
And
so.
I'm curious, what part about it do you think has been vital to their continued success? People keep coming back, people keep voting it to be a great place to work.
I think it's that we are extremely people focused and we're extremely
Mm.
craft led. We recognize the value that everybody individually brings to the team, and we make teams out of it. And we care a lot about the individual. We have some incredible support teams in HR, in finance, in learning and development, in our legacy teams. All these teams are there to support the individuals. Like it's not like the game team and the business teams who are there to create product. These people are just there for our benefit. And when there's any problem, anything that is bothering you and stopping you from doing your role, you just have these huge array of people that are just there to help you and support you. And the last couple of years has proven that immensely. We've had people really, obviously, understandably struggling with this whole new way of living. People around the world who haven't been able to come into the studio, who thought they were going to move, who couldn't move, people in the UK who were stuck here in lockdown that we've helped get back home to their home country in order to spend time there. It's forced us to create all these different processes and policies and ways of working, and we've taken it in our stride. It's been amazing. The gift baskets, even little things like that just make you feel valued. That you just suddenly you've got a cake on your doorstep, and it sounds trivial, right? But it isn't. It's like, I needed a cake today. That's what's getting me through my Monday.
You didn't know it.
Yeah. It's amazing.
Yeah.
I think that's what makes the difference, because it's an easy thing to not focus on. And I think CA does an incredible job of making us feel valued.
Fantastic. As a development director,
Mm.
what have been some of the challenges or some of the disguised benefits of coming back to the office after 2 years working from home?
Yeah, it's been interesting. I don't think anything is ever going to replace the creative collaboration of being together. Um,
Yeah.
it's not to say that it's impossible. I think some indie teams that are close knit have figured it out because in some ways
Hmm.
they've always done it. I think in a large studio, um, you at a certain stage of the project, you need people to come together. You need that informal coolness where you're just walking past someone's desk and you're like, "Oh, that's amazing," and they're like, "Oh, really? Oh, because
Yes.
I wasn't sure
Yes.
about it," and you're like, "No, dude, that's incredible!" Like, "Oh, that's just inspired me to go do this thing." And I
I
would
do
get that
miss that.
all the time, right? And they're not even things that anything to do with my day to day. There'd be like a concept artist is working on something, or a programmer's come up with a cool new mechanic, and it's just kind of got me out of a funk. I had it the other week where I had like 4 days of remote agile training, and then had to put some finance information together straight afterwards. And then I had an hour with our creative director where he was just running me through a high level design. And it was like, oh, this is what I'd missed. And if he'd been in the studio,
Yes.
he would have been sat right next to me and I'd have seen it all the time. And I would have just got,
Over the shoulder.
little like minute by minute boosts, as opposed to I was just getting
Yeah.
this massive adrenaline shot in the neck of 2 weeks worth. So I think as people start to come back in, you pick that up. I think on the flip side, it's given people the opportunity to figure out that balance, um,
Hmm.
and figure out how and when it's appropriate to work remote and how and when it's appropriate to be in the studio. And I don't think we'd have ever done it at this sort of scale if we weren't forced. And I
Hmm.
think that's the same for most studios, right? Because when you've got
Yes.
that number of people, it just becomes this task that's too big to move past. So I think most studios are looking at some kind of hybrid approach where they can get the best out of people at different times. And I think at later stages in production, when most of the work is known, giving people the opportunity to go off and do that makes a lot of sense. And early on in projects, when that collaboration is important, giving people the opportunity to do it together in the studio is also useful. I think one of the things people forget sometimes is their impact on others. So them being
Mm.
back in the studio, the benefit that can have on other people. They'll think about,
Mm.
I'm perfectly productive at home, but what about the people around you? Are they, and do they even know it? I think, as I said, the number of people that we've recruited, we don't really know what the status quo of everyone being back in the studio is yet. So, we kind of need to re-benchmark, find out, what is a good middle ground for everybody. Because, like most things, there's polarizing opinions around it at both ends, right?
Hmm.
There's a lot of people out there shouting from both ends, and it's just finding that balance that works for most people.
Yeah, yeah, that's something I haven't thought about myself, right? I'm very insular. I think about how am I the most productive and is this contributing to the team in the best way possible?
Mhm.
Really kind of forgetting the fact that it's like, hey, me just being around the team or whatever discipline can offer some benefits that
Yeah.
I didn't know, right? And team doesn't know until we're back in the office
Mhm.
to be like, hey, so yeah, to your point of it being finding that balance. I like the word re-benchmarking, right? Recalibrating to
Yeah.
see based on now what we know, how can we move things around or schedule days in the office where we're here or certain people are here,
Yeah.
and when do we need to be at home? I really love that you call out depending on the part of development you're
Mhm.
in, where hey, we know what it takes to ship this thing. We can be wherever it is that we're most productive and
Yeah.
most able to focus, or hey, we're in a kind of prototyping, pre-pro, early design phase. when are we the most creative,
Mhm.
and maybe that's around each other, right? We need to be in an office, we need to be in meeting rooms. Yeah, this is really it's a really exciting time, right, where we
Yeah,
continue to
it is.
refine what the next years of development are going to look like
Yep,
for different studios.
yep,
Totally.
definitely.
um you've spoke a lot about the people side, the
Mhm.
soft skills. Curious, what would you call out as a maybe your superpower that you bring to the development director craft that has allowed you to really succeed in this role and bring the most value to CA?
Superpower. That's a good question.
Or the superpower you encourage people to
Yeah,
work
yeah,
on
yeah. I
coming into this
got asked
role?
that literal question in a studio questionnaire the other week, and I think mine was hyperactive enthusiasm. I think I have,
Hyperactive
yeah,
enthusiasm.
right. I've
I
learned from
see
my
that.
kids. Um, I think in production it can be very easy to get bogged down in how much information you have at your fingertips, and
Yes.
that everything can look not great if you look at it just objectively. But you have the power sometimes in a morning stand up to be the one person who's positive, to be the one person who's going in there going, "Hey, how's everyone doing? Let's get ice creams," and turning up with
Oh,
ice cream,
hell
right?
yeah.
Yeah, and it's little things like that that can just completely change the tone of a sprint, because I generally believe, and this is a little controversial, that your gut feel and the team's gut feel about a product can often be more representative of the game than the objective data shows. Now, you can't ride that forever. You can't say, no, everything's fine, even though
Mm.
your scope versus capacity is going horribly downhill. But I think there are plenty of times when the team knows best. And if you can get a nice balance between your objective reporting and your subjective reporting, so relying entirely on data and relying
Mhm.
on how the game feels, if you can get a good balance there, I think you'll get a good rapport with the team, because only the most seasoned cynics would argue that there is no value in objective data, right? They
Right.
Most devs know that you've got to have some way of measuring progress objectively,
Hmm.
but I think some dev managers, producers can rely on that too heavily, without really knowing where their game is at. And I think having the ability to help people measure that, and I think that's really important, because I don't think a producer should be the creative measure for the team. I think the producers should help everybody to a certain extent get a feel for where they're at, because there's one interview question that I ask producers, which is your day 8 of 10 in a sprint, and everybody told you on day 1 it was all going to be fine, and on day 8 you've only got 2 days left, but you've got 4 days left worth of work. What are some options you can do? And the obvious
Hmm.
answers are things like ask for more time, ask for more people. Um, and they can often be perfectly valid things. But one of the answers that I like to hear is people going, maybe we're actually on time and our measures are incorrect. Maybe people
Yeah.
didn't understand what the task was and they've overcomplicated it. That happens so often, especially, I'm going to call them out here, programmers often think that what they've got to do is far more complicated than it needs to be right now. And in sprints, that happens a lot, because programmers in particular sometimes struggle with the idea of an MVP, and I get it, right? A
Hmm.
minimum viable product. They're trying to work out what is the minimum viable product they can put out. And in their mind, that's quite a high bar, because they have a nice black and white description of what they're being asked to do. It's very
Hmm.
easy to quantify that. And we actually changed the definition of that to be a demonstrable feature increment. And for programmers, that blew their minds, because they were suddenly like, I'm not trying to create a minimum viable product. I am just at the end of the sprint needing to demonstrate how this feature has incrementally changed this sprint. and suddenly they're like, okay, yes, I can do this.
And blowing their minds with going from an MVP mindset
To
to a
a
DFI.
DFI, yeah,
Uh,
you got it.
it's like
John's
demonstrable
listening.
feature increment.
Increment.
And it's like and it's just shifting the paradigm, right? Changing the perspective to, I guess, focus more on the white space instead of the negative space or something.
Yeah, it's just
And that helps somebody come back around to it and be open to it versus closed off to it.
exactly, because then they're just going, right, I just need to be able to show this to another programmer, because it may not be a visual thing that they're demonstrating for another 2 sprints, but it allows somebody, a stakeholder, to determine whether or not we're going to spend another sprint on this, or if we want to
Yeah.
pivot, or if we want to abandon it completely. Because there were too many examples of programmers, especially, spending 5-6 sprints on something until it was able to be demonstrated, and suddenly we're like, that's not what we wanted at all, and you've just wasted 12
Yeah.
weeks on something. And it's just trying to get that mindset shift, because while we were using terminology like MVP, they were like, well, this is my minimal viable product, it's going to take me 12 weeks. But by changing that to, you need to be able to just show somebody your progress, then it just it
Somebody.
shifted. And you tell the story and people are like, well, that's so obvious, that's what they should have suggested. That's not what they're here to do. They're here to program. They're not here to think about these process changes. That's what producers are for. It can just
There you go. There you go. I'm curious, as you talk about this, me, I work on a live title, and I feel like it's easier to show changes or incremental changes there because the title exists. You have a very clear indication on screen of what's changing, what's being changed. And I'm curious, working on Arena,
Mhm.
does the part of development or production you're in smooth out those expectations of deliverables, or does it change at all? Does it get better?
Yeah, it got better as the team understood the impact, and I think
Mm-hmm.
getting the players' feedback, maturing the community to the point where they weren't just yelling about stuff that was on fire, they were actually giving us constructive feedback, and that was as much our responsibility as theirs, to show that we had the processes and the time to listen and adjust. It was obviously very easy from, say, a balance point of view. We had some very well developed tools that allowed us to respond when we put a new unit or commander out there that was OP. We could adjust them quite quickly, and with the features, it was difficult to put out something that wasn't good enough, if that makes sense.
Mm-hmm.
We needed the time in certain areas if it was something that we hadn't considered as being a priority. Those were the hardest things, because it's like, okay, we can see there's an urgent need for this, but there is also a reality of how much time it's going to take to get out there. And if you try and simplify it too much, it does more harm than good, because especially for a free-to-play title, the new people coming into the game are not financially invested. They're trying this as a free-to-play, and they will just look at it and go, well, that's basic. That's not what I wanted. I'll just go and try something else.
Mm-hmm.
So it's that's the side of it that's difficult. But I think once we showed the community that we were putting out new content that was worth the value we were putting on it, that we were addressing the bugs that were important to them, we were running events that were meaningful, that were engaging. We were running promotional things at weekends, again, that were not just trying to clear the least sold thing off the shelf, that we were actually giving them opportunities to invest in something close to what they were already interested in. Once we developed the daily mission system, so that it was helping them on their journey, it was motivating them to keep coming back. Initially, we were looking at it as a monetization tool, in order to get them to invest in different unit types, but we learned that the community liked what they liked, and it was quite difficult to push them
Mm-hmm.
into different types of units. And actually, it shouldn't be a monetization tool; it should be a retention tool that you're encouraging them to come back. And instead of going massively outside of what they've done, you just kind of move them slightly. So you encourage them to play more battles than they would normally do. You encourage them to move up to the next tier than they would normally do. So it's little nudges that the
Mm-hmm.
a combination of that just desire to complete a mission and also the reward that they get from completing the mission. Those two motivators were the best things, because I think a lot of people lose sight of the players in a free-to-play game that are not spending money are helping create an environment that people who do want to spend money will spend money. Right? It's kind of one of those lessons that it seems to take new devs to the space a few months to get their head around, that it's okay that not everybody's spending money in your game, as long as the people who are spending lots of it. Um, and
Yes, and that ecosystem, right? Like
yeah,
nobody's going to play a game that doesn't have people in it, and the majority of your players are going to be the people that are not
yeah,
paying
yeah,
money.
yeah.
Hmm.
It's pretty simple stuff, right? But once you realize that you're going to have to do feature development that isn't necessarily going to monetize, um, that is just going to create a healthy game environment, great. And I
Yes.
think that also helps some devs as well, that they're creating something that's a bit more traditional. They're not just pushing monetization techniques. They are just, you always want people to be playing your game, and that
Hmm.
then gets more people on board, because you have to accept that not every dev is comfortable in a free to play environment. That you need to get the best talent, and if you need to have different ways of motivating them to do their best work, that sometimes it involves putting them on a less monetization heavy feature, and that's
Hmm.
just getting the best out of people. Um,
Yeah.
so
Yeah. I think interesting standpoint from a development director standpoint, an area that you probably I myself don't readily think about, that usually falls out of the day-to-day development, is the community management aspect
mhm,
and creating those mechanisms to listen to the players.
mhm,
That brings me to the question, Mark, about the development director umbrella.
mhm.
Is there an area that people forget about, or that needs coverage, or do you have kind of coverage across? All right, let me step back. What is the area of development or a free to play title that people don't readily think about, like, hey, we need to worry about this sooner than later, we should plan for this in advance?
I think wider than the title, it's the people management. I think
Okay.
I think production generally is assumed that you care about people the least, because you're
Wow.
not really anybody's direct line manager other than the other producers, and your sole purpose is to ship the game, and it is a
Hmm.
purpose, just like it's everybody's purpose to ship the game. But I think production has a fairly unique opportunity to know everybody on the team, know what motivates them, know what's worrying them, know what their problems are, knows the best combinations of people, knows the worst combinations of people. I think all of those, I really hate using the phrase soft skills, but it's the only phrase that people generally understand. It's those.
Yeah.
And they need to stop being called soft skills, because they are just as important, right? Soft makes it sound like it's just, the cuddly stuff that it doesn't matter if you're not very good at it. It's so important. Because to me, those
Extremely,
are
and
the
it's hard to teach.
exactly. I was exactly going to say that, right? Because that's
Hmm.
why when you're interviewing somebody for a production role and they've got a portfolio, a production portfolio is so easy to put together. Like, no disrespect to people that have spent time doing it, but I want someone that can explain that to a non-producer. I want somebody who can
Yes.
sit down with them over a coffee and go, "You look like you're having a hard time at the moment. How's it going?" And actually care about the response they're given back, because those are the people that are worth their weight in gold. Because if you've got those people on your team, when you're having problems, they're the people who are going to fix it. Um, and
Hmm.
I can teach anybody to use Jira. I can teach anybody to put together a project plan. I'm not saying it's not difficult, because it does involve skills, but the
And
people side,
experience.
it's so difficult to teach it, and it relies, when you're doing interviewing, on a gut feel of just knowing when somebody is going to be the right fit for your team. And it can be difficult feedback to give sometimes, because even if somebody has those
Hmm.
skills, you can kind of see whether or not they're going to bond with your team. And I think that, especially at the
Yeah.
director level, is a really, really important skill, that when you're trying to um, bring a team together, um, and I interview not just for producers, but for all the other director positions, all the other lead positions, you're trying to create a group, right? You're not just trying to fulfill the job descriptions. And sometimes you have to say to somebody, you're perfectly qualified, you're a perfectly nice person. I just don't think you're going to get on with two or three members of the rest of the team. Um, and people are like, oh, right.
Yeah.
And you're like, you have to recruit based on the group that you've got. And it involves making hard decisions sometimes, and that can upset people, especially if they're going, "You're telling me you needed this person. We just found this person. What's wrong?" It's like, it's not our person. We need that to be somebody that makes this group, right? And it's a very difficult balance, and sometimes you have to compromise, and you just have to pick the areas where you're going to cause least harm. But I think, again, it's one of those things that if you show your team that you care about the people you're bringing in, uh, it's another big plus in terms of them trusting you to get the best out of them.
Absolutely, Mark. A big part of team building is trust. And, we can't emphasize this enough. Soft skills, empathy is another overused word, but I mean, what
Yep,
other word clearly
absolutely.
conveys that the
Yep.
best is being able to put yourself in someone else's shoes? And I'm curious, how do you, one, how do you go about sussing that out in an interview, right? We're
Hmm.
trying to figure out for up and coming producers trying to get into this space. If we haven't beat it into them enough by this point, is to, work on your
Yep.
people skills.
Yep.
That's a key part of the
Yep.
role. How do you look for that? And how would you go about helping someone grow that? Right? It's hard to teach. We know that.
But you can, you can. It's
Mm.
just very difficult. In interviews, I think the best way is role plays. I know it's a terrifying phrase for most people, but I think if you can set the tone early on in the interview, that it's like, look, we want this to be as relaxed as possible. I want you to be yourself. In this role play, I'm never going to ask you to be anybody other than yourself, because it wouldn't be fair. I'll do the work and be the randoms, but I'm just going to give you some scenarios, and we don't have to put on accents. You don't have to be like completely false. Just talk me through your approach. Like, this doesn't need to be I'm literally going to be that person. It's just, I'm going to be this. I'm going to respond like this. How would you walk me through it? And I think the best people, again, can react in that situation. I would never tell anybody beforehand that I'm going to do role plays, because they tend to be over prepared or freaked out. So I'll just bring it up towards the
Yes.
end of the interview. Like, we're just going to spend 10 minutes. I'm just going to give you some scenarios. Talk me through how you'd handle it. And it throws people. And I'll go like, look, do you want to go grab a coffee? Have a think about it for a minute, and then we'll pick this up, because it isn't meant to be this massive daunting thing. I just want to understand how you'd respond in some situations, and it's okay if they just go, you know what, I don't know how to respond in that situation. As long as they don't say
Hmm.
that for every
Yeah.
role play, that's not a great situation. But if there's one or two where it's like, "Oh, I'm not sure about that one," because
Sure.
as a tangent, that's a useful thing for producers to know. Like, for most disciplines, Google's a really useful tool, and production's no different. And sometimes you do just have to step back from something and go, I don't know. I'm going to go find out what
Yes.
that even means. And you go away and look it up, and
Exactly.
and again, that shows an honesty, especially in an interview setting, that you don't know everything. Especially if
Yeah.
you're coming in at a trainee, associate level. I don't expect you to know everything, and I will largely word the questioning to an appropriate level. But sometimes I'll push people a little bit, because I want to know,
Yeah.
how far up is this person going to go with the minimal amount of development. In terms of
Indeed.
in terms of teaching them and developing them, I think it's it's a mentoring process. Much as we talked about earlier about succession planning, it's really important that as a dev director, I'm showing people what it is that I do on a day-to-day basis. I'm not keeping anything as mine. I want to delegate everything eventually. I want people to be able to learn to be able to pick these things up so that when we're creating new teams, when we're running teams through into the live phase of a product, that people can pick this up without chucking them in the deep end. So I think when you get situations of performance management, when you get situations of you're dealing with like grievances or people's bereavements, giving that person the opportunity to go, is it okay if I bring another producer in with me? Because in some situations that's appropriate to not just have two of you in the room, but also because I want them to see how this sort of thing should be handled, add a different perspective. That's one way of doing it. I think another is varying the teams that they're working in. As a way of not pigeonholing somebody primarily. You don't want them just to be working with tech heavy teams or art heavy teams. The more you can move them around, and I wouldn't do it too often because you still want to be able to build up that level of trust between the teams. But every 6 months or so, just go, right, we're going to have a shift around, and it will just engage them with different types of people. You may find that some producers really struggle. Like personally, I struggle with art-based teams. I find myself easier to connect with tech teams, but that means that I will a lot of the time spend most of my time with the art teams because that's where I want to develop my area. And so it's just finding that right balance, and it's just giving people the opportunity. Sometimes they can be outside the team. You can do like a 3 months secondment, go, hey, look, go work on that team. They're doing a really cool thing right now that will help your development. And then give them the opportunity to talk about it. So another reason why CA is very good at the people side is that we mandate monthly one-to-ones between leads and the people that report to them. But they also encourage one-to-ones between anybody in terms of the individual development. But I would then make sure that in the one-to-ones, it wasn't just about their career progression. It wasn't just about their current performance. It was about, right, let's talk to me about how you would handle this sort of situation. Let's go back to the interview type thing of let's role play some of this stuff. How did that come up? I often learn as much as they learn from me in these situations because they'll come up against stuff that I haven't. And I think it's a great opportunity to just be open about stuff. And if you've got that rapport with the people that you're having one-to-ones with, that they feel like they can tell you stuff they're struggling with. Again, to me, that's a great indicator of quite an empathetic person, and you can develop that. And hopefully then they can flip it back around and be like that with their team.
Totally. I can hear it resonate of the way that people can grow on the team, where it's not just things that interest them, but it's also areas that they want to develop in or learn more about.
Yep.
Right? Hey,
Yep.
I program networking. I want to learn to program in gameplay, for example. Or hey, I've been working on a free-to-play title. I want to go work on a box product or something like that, right? And having those conversations in advance to be able to kind of create that roadmap
Absolutely,
for the individual.
because the succession planning may not be within your team. Exactly to your point of free to play and box product, you might have to plan that this person is going to suddenly move off onto a different game. And I think if you have the openness with that person, they're going to give you a lot more notice than if they suddenly go, oh yeah, I've asked that lead if I can go work on their product. I'm going next week. Like, or even worse, they're going to leave the company. Right? If you can show them
even worse
that you've given them the pathway to go where they want, even if that's not within your team, it relies on everybody in the business having that same mentality so that you're not just giving up all your best people and never getting anybody back. But if you can get that system going, then it allows for everybody to feel like, I can really develop here and everyone's got my best interest at heart, because the easy way is just go, no, everyone's staying here. We're going to develop everybody here. It's like you may not have the opportunity to develop everybody here. You probably won't.
You may not.
It's very unlikely that you
Yeah.
would be able to cater for everybody's career choices.
Yeah, that's a foolproof retention strategy. I love the mindset behind that. I just on the side, Mark, running up past the time. I'll probably start wrapping up here and
Yeah,
just
cool. I've got
ask you
about
probably.
5 minutes or so.
All right,
Is that
perfect.
right?
So we can get into wrapping up.
Yeah,
I'll
cool.
lead you in to say, probably. I really wanted to ask you about things you look for in a resume because there was a cool point you made last time about cover letters.
Oh, cool. Yes.
Do you think you can cover that? And then
Yep.
we'll go into, is creative assembly hiring? What are roles you're looking for? And
Great.
then great talking to you. So probably those things. Okay.
Spot on.
All right. Cool. Mark, what is it that you generally look for on a resume, or you tend to wish you saw more of?
I think with resumes on producers especially, it's not that complex. I want to see experience of different methodologies. I want to see experience of different team sizes, different discipline makeups, and that's not necessarily in games. Like I myself have only spent 4 years in the games industry. I spent 11 years before that in tech, web and bespoke software, and lots of kind of sideways tech rather than specifically in games. I think it's about tailoring your CV to a resume to the audience, and it's going right. I've looked through what's specifically important to them. This is how I'm presenting it, and the ideal companion to that is a cover letter. I think cover letters are often ignored as the annoying wordy bit that you have to add to the front of every application. But I think a cover letter is a really great way of showing specifically why you're applying to that studio. You can go into whatever method of conveying that you like, whether that's just gushing about the latest title that they've brought out and why it resonates with you, or if you know somebody that works at the studio and you know that your way of doing production really fits. That was the technique that I took. It fills in the gaps, because with a resume you can only do so much to make it completely fit before it just looks fake, and you can help explain some areas that are missing in your resume, because 90% of the applications that I look at either don't have a cover letter, or the cover letter is literally like, here is my resume, I hope you contact me soon. You're like, you may as well not have bothered.
Well, yeah. Why even bother?
So if you put together a tailored resume and a cover letter that is clearly conveys your passion for wanting to join that studio, in my experience, that puts you in above the 90 percentile of all applicants. And when I'm going through them every day with my coffee, rolling my eyes as I hit no, suddenly you're like, oh, someone that's taken the time to actually listen. Okay, cool, let's read this. And
Yes.
I'm going to be far more forgiving than I would be if you hadn't done that. And that makes me sound tough, but we have to face the reality that lots of people apply for production positions because they think they're qualified through a whole range of different experiences. It's not like programming or art where it's very specific. Like, you're obviously going to have that. The different areas that I have had people try and convince me that their experience is the same as a game producer is very, very varied. So I do have a lot of easy to decline applications, shall we say, to go through. So if you can stand out as somebody who cares about the role they're applying for, fantastic.
There you go. Excellent. Fantastic, Mark. That was a great pro tips right there. Hope people are listening and taking notes. With that, are there any particular standout roles that Creative Assembly is looking for? Are you hiring? Where can people go to check that out?
So if you go to creativeassembly.com/careers, and we have roles across the board. We've got so many exciting projects coming up at the moment that I can't think of a discipline we're not hiring for, because we are
Excellent.
there are so many different things
Is
going on.
it
It's
all
mad.
UK based?
So we're reviewing that at the moment. Historically, we've been UK based, but we're looking at different opportunities for people to work remote. I'm not sure that detail is necessarily on the website yet, but I'd encourage anybody to apply with whatever their situation is, and we'll consider it, because I think if we've learned anything in the last 2 years, it's that flexibility is pretty important. So.
Flexibility, exactly. Marc, thank you so much for your time.
No
Do you have
worries.
any closing words for the audience?
Diversity. Haven't got enough of it in the games industry. Oh my goodness, I wish we had more. Like, I am in the process of setting up a new game team, and it is one of our most important pillars, because you cannot make a good game with a whole bunch of white dudes, to be blunt. And we need to fix it. And I'm encouraged by the strength in our diverse community of trying to change stuff. And I am a strong ally of everything that is going on. When I get out to universities and I see a wide range of backgrounds, genders, approaches, it's encouraging, but games industry is behind, and it needs a kick up the backside to fix it, because the only way we make the best games for the widest range of people is if they're made by the best people from the widest range of backgrounds. And I hope the industry, and part of this responsibility is on me as a privileged white dude, to get its act together and starts to sort it out, because we can point fingers and make excuses all we like, but it's our problem to fix, and we've got to do everything we can.
I love it. No better way to say it. It's a problem. We can always do better, and we have to keep talking about it and beating that drum. And it starts at the university level, the program level. How do we encourage or build up programs to get people in that may not have believed that this is a path for them? Absolutely, Marc. I'm with you. I support you on that, sir.
Thank you, John.
Have a great one, and we'll see you again, hopefully soon in the future. Hear what Creative Assembly is up to next.
Thanks a lot. It's been great.
Thank you so much for listening to this episode of the Zero to Play podcast. I hope you learned something about game development, the games industry as a whole, or the future of games. You can follow us on Twitter at Zero to Play, subscribe to us on YouTube, follow us on Spotify, or any other podcasting service. Other than that, you can find links to this episode down in the description below, and I'll see you guys next week for the next episode.